I think just to go a bit more into a bit more detail, thinking of people coming, I think that those rules, they sort of have a certain poetry. Look after yourself, look after this, each other, look after this place. But I think it can be helpful to people to be a bit more concrete. So what does that mean? What might that look like? What things should I think of if I'm going to come here? And how would I know? And I think, for us, I think as we've talked about this, there's a number of beliefs I think we hold, or points of view anyway, about these kinds of conversations and what's necessary to make them as fruitful as possible. So one is the idea that everybody's qualified to speak. That in this space, it doesn't depend upon your title or role or position, that your position, your experience, your life, your vantage point is as valid as anyone else's. And so that we're all equally qualified to speak. Sometimes that's the one where, as we say, as you said earlier, we kind of self-eliminate. Nobody disqualifies us. We can disqualify ourselves. But that's one that we think is important to understand. And with that, as I said, that you're participating as yourself, as your whole self, with all that brings, not just as a CEO or a teacher or a technologist. And so that means that this is a space really to explore and find questions as much as to answer them. And that idea that you've expressed before, finding the questions, not finishing them. And that, to some people, may seem like a bit of a cop-out, but actually, it's interesting if you think about how much time do we actually spend with questions and looking for good questions, and how important is it to find the right questions? And I think it's very rare to give ourselves that, and it's often seen as a luxury. And I think here we want to allow that space to really delve into more questions, deeper questions, more articulate questions. I think silence and quiet are really interesting.
Yeah. I learned a lot about the power of silence through this.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, and it's kind of talk can be a kind of runaway train, and I think that talking and thinking, I'm one of those people that tends to think out loud by talking, so I can, if I'm not careful, very often fill space. But I still think that, if you like, the quality of a good conversation, the quality of a conversation can be sensed by the quality of the quiet or the silence within it. That people, when they're really thinking and really hearing each other and really dwelling on things, if somebody's talking the whole time, that's very hard to have it happen. So in the online environment, that's particularly striking, and something I think we're all learning to do. But definitely part of Basecamp is to allow for and encourage those silences. And I think, looping back to what we were saying before about certainty, I think there's a sense here as well that in terms of how do you participate, the thing about certainty is that it tends to close down. So if I venture into speech and kind of go, no, this is definitely like this, then to get a different point of view in the room, somebody now has to disagree with me or say I'm wrong, that it's definitely like that. And so the certainty of things tends to sort of close things down, whereas doubt, really? Is that really the case? Or is there something else we haven't seen? So that willingness to be in doubt, John Keats' famous negative capability, willingness to be in doubt without the irritable reaching after fact and reason, as he described it, is really important. And then I suppose the last thing that's kind of interesting here to think about is how, as we were saying earlier, the joy of these three simple rules is that we can then all wield them. We can then all use them. We can tend to the conversation. And so in the Basecamp style conversations, yes, there are conveners who are kind of more generally holding the space, but everybody is able to participate, not just in the conversation itself, but in the managing of the conversation. And so, we're inviting people to help us to kind of manage the conversation.